Much and very good afternoon. Good day to all of you who are joining us from the Southern Africa region, across the African continent and beyond. My name is Marlon Zakeyo, and I work with the Southern Africa Trust based in Johannesburg. This is the fourth installment of a really exciting and insightful webinar series that the Southern Africa Trust and our partners have been putting together, particularly in the aftermath of the COVID-19 global pandemic. And we have thought that we use this virtual platform to structurally and yet organically connect civil society, community foundations, and members of vulnerable communities to different stakeholders and audiences around the world for the purposes of sharing our experiences, sharing our knowledge, gathering data, and particularly focusing on solutions through dialogue on these very virtual platforms. And so this will be the fourth installment today, and I'm particularly quite excited to be in the company of three of Southern Africa and Africa's brightest to discuss, to focus on the voices of Southern Africa's youth in the era of COVID-19. And so we will have an hour together, and we will have two segments of 30 minutes each. We will start with the panelists introducing themselves, and each of them will have 5 to 7 minutes of really sharing their stories from both a personal and professional level on the work that they're doing, and particularly from their perspective, what the role and impact of young people is in confronting this global pandemic. And again, to mention that so much data has been shared since the outbreak of COVID-19, and we are particularly looking ahead to discussing what could be the possible signs of hope and what are the solutions that could be provided in this conversation. And so, I mean, it is often said that Africa is a continent with lots of jewels, but amongst the brightest of our crown jewels is our young people. And so that we're looking forward to be spending this afternoon together with Rukudzo, Ronald, and Thokoza to just share with us on their perspectives and the work that they're doing before, during, and possibly after the pandemic. And so I'll just ask the three of you to introduce yourselves briefly, starting with Rukudzo. We'll then go to Ronald and then Thokoza before we start off our conversation. Thank you. Rukudzo, please.
Okay, hi guys. Thank you very much to Southern Africa Trust for this opportunity. My name is Rukudzo Nyoka. I'm Zimbabwean who is based in Mauritius, but I'm currently back home in Zimbabwe due to this COVID situation. So I'm currently a student at the African Leadership University doing my final year studying social science. I'm passionate about emerging technologies, women empowerment, and proper policy making. But also I've co-founded an education technology startup called Mtabe, which is based in Tanzania. So basically at Mtabe, we provide educational content to students without internet access. So we use SMS technology and artificial intelligence. And in this particular COVID era, education is one of the sectors that has actually experienced one of the biggest setbacks, particularly when looking at our continent where people are basically forced to resort to online learning, which is practically impossible in a continent where approximately 35% have access to the internet. So this is going to be a great panel session as we get to explore, particularly for me, some of the possible solutions that can actually be implemented within the educational space and how best we can move forward as a continent or as a region. Thank you, Marlon.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Rukudzo. I'll now cross over to you, Ronald.
Okay, thank you very much, Marlon and Southern Africa Trust for this opportunity that you have accorded me to be part of this, esteemed panel. So my name is Ronald Magomo, and I'm working with the Southern Africa Youth Forum, SADC, which is a regional platform for youth and youth organizations that are working, across the SADC region. And our work, prior to the COVID-19 pandemic was also to coordinate the work that young people are doing in the SADC region, and also cascading down, initiatives that are also being implemented at the continental level. You talk of your 1 million by 2021, campaigns, among others, in the SADC region. And now during this, pandemic that has hit the globe, we are also coordinating the work that young people are doing. There are vast, innovations that are coming up, that young people are also doing in terms of producing PPE materials, also sharing and also fighting misinformation to engage other young people. So we are also there in the on the front line in terms of also ensuring that young people are getting the necessary support that they also want. And recently we were also selected to sit in the Africa Youth Front, which is a continental task force that has been set up by the African Union, led by the AU Special Youth Envoy, Mrs. Ayachebi, to coordinate, the work that young people are doing in fighting and responding to the coronavirus. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ronald. We will engage and really like to hear a lot more of the work that you've been involved in, particularly also engaging at the African Union level and also fighting disinformation. So thanks so much. Last but definitely not least, Thokoza, it's a pleasure to be in your company today. Perhaps you'd like to also to share a little bit about yourself and the work that you do.
Awesome. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you for the invitation. So my name is Thokoza Nyoka. I am from South Africa. I'm based in Johannesburg. And I'd say what gets me out of bed in the morning is this need to live in an Africa with economically active young people. I'm a finance graduate by training and entrepreneur by experience. I think I had my first brush with entrepreneurship when I was still in high school. I currently work at the African Leadership Academy. I work specifically on the Anzisha Prize program, where we support very young entrepreneurs to build job generative businesses. And by very young, I mean young people between the ages of 15 and 22. Yeah, I think I'll stop there for now.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Thokoza. We're really looking also forward to sharing your perspectives and hearing particularly what also drives the age group that you are working with, the very young, between 15 and 22, because also a lot of the issues we're dealing with are affecting them in a deep way, and they will have to live with the decisions that are being made by policymakers of today. So that would be really great just to also spend the next minutes with you and getting those insights together. So let's get right into the thick of things, my dear friends, and I will go back to Rukudzo. I think it's very interesting. It's a very interesting mix that you bring to the conversation. Both from the tech perspective, you've shared with us that you are very much passionate about emerging technologies. You've dabbled and worked on artificial intelligence and looking at the issue of data. On the other hand, you're also somebody that is alive to social issues, and you've dedicated a lot of effort into working towards and supporting women's empowerment, and the betterment of our communities. I would just like you to share a little bit more of that, looking into the current crisis that we're facing with COVID-19. I've read somewhere that we're facing two things that are going viral. One is, of course, COVID-19, and the second is fake news. And so I'd like just to hear your perspectives on the issue of data gaps that we're facing, misinformation. What is the role of Africa's young people in moving us forward? What sort of solutions are you discussing with your peers and in the work that you do for us to move ahead and creating a new future for ourselves and the rest of the world. Rukudzo.
Okay, thank you very much. I think you have touched on a very important problem that we're encountering as a continent, which is access to information. Because in as much as there's been a call for the continent to digitize and, catch up with the fourth industrial revolution, which is data, Internet of Things, etc., you'd realize that it leaves behind the most important sector, or the most important group of people, which is the young people, who are basically most of the time incapacitated, whether economically or educationally. So you'd realize that that's where entrepreneurship comes in and, sort of like tries to close in those gaps. So what I love about African entrepreneurship is that it has been able to take, technologies from abroad and adapt them, to our situation. I think the most common example would be M-Pesa, or mobile money, where it has played a critical role in, financially including everybody, to those who do not have access to internet. So right now, I feel like as entrepreneurs and as young people, we need to start looking at how to customize and to adapt the solutions that we have, to our own environment, right? So that, we make sure that we leave nobody behind. At this point in time, when we're talking about fake news, you'd realize that if you're to come to rural Zimbabwe, nobody knows what COVID-19 is. Nobody understands or even knows why they're supposed to be maybe self-isolating. And at the end of, on the other hand, also we have us in the urban areas who have access to internet and WhatsApp, and we have all these broadcast messages coming through to a point we don't even know which information is correct. So I feel like we as the young generation, we should be able to step in and come up with solutions that, one, help provide information to everyone in the most accessible way possible. Because I believe that the ideal technology is one that people can use, have access to, and is cheap for everyone to use, right? So as entrepreneurs and young people, we should be coming to a point where we are designing solutions that actually, help everyone or benefit everyone, not only people who can afford or people who have access to certain infrastructures. And secondly, as young people, we're at a stage in our lives where we have agency, we have the power, we are more exposed than the previous generations. So we need to come to a space whereby we are very active in, synthesizing and sifting the kind of information that we're either disseminating or engaging with. Because whatever I engage with, I share it with my friends. So we need to come to a stage where we sift it and we synthesize it so that, we play a big part in disseminating information that is correct, information that, pushes us forward. Because at this rate at which we're going, I feel like those are some of the essential things that we need to start looking at as young people within the continent. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Rukudzo. I mean, you've just set us off in a powerful direction, and I do agree with you, and I'm inspired by your call to say, as young people of your generation, you've got the agency and you've got the power within you much more than the previous generation to be active and to take the future into your own hands and to adapt. Let's learn from everybody else, and but let's adapt the available technologies to address our local challenges, and so that they fit into the context of where where we live. And I also love the idea that you talk about making sure beyond access, we tackle the issues of affordability. How can we make sure that the poorest and the most vulnerable can afford these technologies, and that they make a difference in the lives of our people on the African continent? Thanks so much. We'll get back to you. I will also encourage all those that are tuning in via the different platforms to please share any questions that you might have to Rukudzo. Ronald and Thokoza, so that we can engage in conversation. So we will switch swiftly now to hear from Ronald. You talked to us about your work across the Southern Africa region, working with the Southern Africa Youth Forum, and also your engagement at the African Union level. I think also what I'm excited about personally is that all three of you are young people who may be based in specific countries and specific communities, but you have looked at borders as things that you are not limited by the physical borders. Your work and your influence is going beyond those physical boundaries, and you are carrying forward the agenda for regional integration and for the integration of our people. I would just like to hear a little bit more from you, Ronald, also from your perspectives and your work, how you've been experiencing COVID-19 at a personal level, and what are some of the solutions that you and your peers have been looking at? What are the critical areas that you're thinking of, and what would be the kind of future that you would like us to recreate post this pandemic? Over to you, Ronald.
Okay. Thank you very much, Marlon, for the opportunity that you have also accorded me to, elaborate more on the issues that I have also highlighted earlier on. So, Southern Africa Youth Forum is working, in the SADC region, and at this moment, work is around, also amplifying, what young people are doing on the ground, responding to the COVID-19. And it is also important to share that youth responses, to the COVID-19 have not been a one size fits all. Why? Because the number of cases and confirmed, coronavirus cases in some of these, SADC member states a little bit different. If you look at South Africa, it is now more than 11,000. And if you look at other SADC countries, for example, Zimbabwe, still at 37, and others are less than 20. So in some countries, for example, interacting with young people virtually who are in Malawi, for example, before the announcement of the lockdown, you would hear that it was business as usual, and young people were actually saying that COVID-19 does not exist. Why? Because no cases had yet been recorded in Malawi during that particular moment. But however, COVID-19 is real, and with the work that we are also doing, we are also there to amplify what young people are doing. At this moment, there are a lot of innovations that are coming up from young people, be it the production of protective equipment. You talk of your masks. We had one amazing young person, Maya Koloma from Malawi, who was also doing 3D printing of masks and also sharing and distributing them. In Malawi, in Madagascar, for example, we also have young people who are on the ground, and in Comoros, we also have young people who are also trying to provide, safe water for the washing of hands, which is also one of the key guidelines that is also being, emphasized by the World Health Organizations and the Ministries of Health. And also in Tanzania, young people are also, on the front line trying to provide leadership and also, provide, solidarity with other young people. For example, also, our young African health workers. These are also risking their own lives to be on the front line fighting the coronavirus. And that is also why on 1 May, 2020, we also celebrated them as our COVID icons, because we also, feel the pressure that COVID-19 has brought on the African health workforce. Of course, in most of the countries, we also appreciate the fact that we do not necessarily have, effective health facilities. Yeah, if you talk of facilities, most of them are also found in the urban areas, and the rural folk are also crying foul. And these are also critical issues which young people are also bringing forth to say, in as much as the Africa Center for Disease Control is also emphasizing on the need to decentralize testing, the need also for Africa's health facilities to be improved. is also, coming up very, very strong. Then, on parts of the impacts on how young people have been affected by the coronavirus, most of our SADC countries, young people have been largely involved in the informal sector, and due to the huge restrictions that have been set to try and reduce the spread of the coronavirus, you also understand that not much has been able to be done on the ground, as a lot of lockdowns have now been imposed in some of these countries, and the young people are just staying home. And this, has hit hard in terms of the livelihoods of young people. A lot of startups now are stuck because they are only in their homes and they cannot move. So a lot of young people have indeed been affected, by these restrictions. In as much as we also want to be saving lives, them as young people who were also, trying to make a living from the informal economy, they are now, affected. And also, Rukudzo started by sharing with us how young learners have also been affected. And this is also something that we have also noticed, that learners have usually been affected because of the closure of schools. Now schools are not operating and they are home. And even though the likes of UNICEF are also coming on board to be providing learning virtually, we also appreciate the fact that not most of the young people are also able to access these virtual platforms. And most of them are also, child-headed families, and the access now to the high cost of data, most of them are not able to be accessing such data to be, also continuing with their learning. And socially, you talk now of your highest rates of gender-based violence and also abuse, and some of the perpetrators of the abuse are also, those who we are looking forward to be enforcing some of these restrictions. And at that point, we also then flag out issues of human rights, abuses, where we also want our young people and youth to continuously, be enjoying their human rights even during these difficult moments, of the coronavirus. And in terms of also the solutions, so as the Southern Africa Youth Forum, SADC, we were also recently appointed to represent, African youth in the United Nations Major Group for Children and Youth. And this is also the official, platform for youth and youth organizations to be engaging in processes of the United Nations. And in that work, we have also begun to share, with other young people opportunities that are also, available at that particular level, because at the UN level, work in the migration working group is also around trying to understand what are the needs of young people at this particular moment and how the voices of young people can be amplified. And at that level, that is also what we are doing. And coming back now to the African Union level, we were also selected to sit and be part of the Africa Youth Front, which is a task force that has been set by the African Union, being led by the AU Special Youth Envoy, Mrs. Ayachebi, to coordinate the responses and the work that African youth are doing. Across the SADC region, you appreciate the fact that national task forces have been set, but it is also worrying that it is not many of these countries with these national task forces to respond to COVID-19 that have incorporated young people in these spaces of decision making. So part of the key work of the Africa Youth Front on COVID-19 will also be to put young people at the center of decision making and at the center of policies that are being crafted at this particular moment to respond to the coronavirus and even beyond the coronavirus. And also it will also be centered around advocating for best practices and also ensuring that there is much support that is also targeted towards young innovators. The first presenter talked about a lot of innovations that are being made, but these are also are in need of support, because Some of them, like I shared earlier on, they are, producing protective, personal equipment. Some of them, they are into the, making of virtual platforms to improve the tracing and, tracking of COVID-19 cases. And this is amazing work that young people are doing. But however, there's need now for much support to be targeted towards these young people. Then if we go back to the earlier point that I was also sharing, to say economically, young people have been hit hard by the coronavirus. As young people, we are also lobbying for youth relief funds to be channeled towards the startups of young people and those entrepreneurs who have largely been affected, by this COVID-19 pandemic, and also issues around, mental health. We had a case, I think it's a day before yesterday in Sierra Leone, where it was said the person who had been, we had tested positive for the coronavirus, the names, and addresses of that person were shared. And as a result of that, a lot of stigma and discrimination is also emanating from that. So with young people in the work that we are also doing, we are then, advocating for mental health, programs to be increased in terms of to ensure that young people are also, supported psychologically. So at this moment, of course, we talk of social distancing, but socially, as an African people, socially, we really need to be coming together in solidarity as young people, and also, respecting the need to practice, physical distancing. But socially, we need to come together because this pandemic has touched, a lot of aspects and affected what young people have been doing. But otherwise, young people are also
Thank
taking
you,
medication.
Ronald. Thank you, Ronald. I had to cut you short there, but we just want also to make sure that we squeeze in as much time as we can. But on that important point of solidarity, I want to ask Thokoza to prepare. But before you just jump in, Thokoza, I want to thank everyone that's been contributing questions. There's a lot of questions that are coming through. Thank you so much for those. Thank you, Hilda. Thank you, Velapi. Thank you, Zibusiso, and others that are preparing questions. We will be asking the presenters to address those and to share their perspectives on those. I also want to ask those that are watching across the different platforms to please share your questions via our email address as well, which is comms@southernafricatrust.org. So comms is COMMS@southernafricatrust.org. So please keep the questions coming. Thokoza, the mic is with you. We want to hear about that fascinating group that you work with. What are they? What are the solutions? What are you hearing from the work that you're doing with young people in this day and age?
Yeah, so there are obviously no easy answers, but what we have decided to do as the Academy and as the Anzisha program is to respond to our entrepreneurs' most urgent needs. And Ronald has also touched on this. One is providing mental health support. So entrepreneurs in our community we are covering the costs for counseling. So they have access to trained counselors, just because it's if you're running a business, you are responsible for employees, people's livelihoods. It's a lot. So just providing that that support to have someone to help you debrief what's happening. Then the second and most important thing for us is finance. So a lot of businesses, their ability to generate revenue has been affected. And quite a few businesses are just not able to operate. So we put together a COVID relief package, and there are 3 options that entrepreneurs can apply to have access to funding. The first option is the employee retention grant. And what we've found is just processing the applications, a lot of the entrepreneurs who are in the services sector, as an example, hospitality, in the education sector, are just not able to operate at the moment, especially entrepreneurs who are running schools. in rural areas. The option of hosting, classes online is not an option. So they are able to apply for the employee grant, for the employee retention grant. And as a result, they're able to protect jobs. Just so they're able to cover the costs. And then the second option we've looked at is the COVID purchases. So some of our entrepreneurs already have existing infrastructure to respond to the needs that have been created by the current pandemic. So entrepreneurs who are in the manufacturing sector, entrepreneurs who are in the agri sector, are able to apply for this grant to provide food to vulnerable communities. So there's some families whose, like one of the speakers mentioned, are from child-headed households or whose parents are just not able to work at the moment, and so they're not able to cover their basic needs. So our entrepreneurs are therefore providing, food and other sources of support to these families, and our organization is covering that cost. So one, to ensure that there's actual cash flow into our entrepreneurs' businesses, but they are also able to use their products and services to respond to their community's most urgent needs. And then the last option is the interest-free loan. So there are some entrepreneurs that are able to operate, but their cash flow has been affected, largely because their clients have decided to renegotiate payments. So it's taking a little bit longer for entrepreneurs to collect payments. And so the interest-free loan allows entrepreneurs to close that gap. So those are just really practical ways that we've responded. And so, yeah, I think I'll stop right there and rather take questions to engage people further.
Fantastic, Thokoza, short and sweet. But thank you so much for those great insights. And I think that our audience would appreciate your sharing your experiences and some of the key issues that you brought forward. And I think people will also be sharing some of the questions that that they have. So let me start with a question that has come through from Hilda. So perhaps I can send this to you, Rukudzo. And if any of you also would like to chip in, please feel free, but we'll start from Rukudzo. The question from Hilda says, what should donor agencies that are funding youth programs prioritize during this pandemic?
Okay, so I feel like this whole COVID situation has been a wake-up call for everybody, because it has been able to highlight some of the systems that have not been working within our society. So for me, being a person involved in education, I would biasly say education, particularly looking at the continent. This is education in all levels, as in how do we get to educate our students? Because as it is, a lot of the educational calendars have been pushed forward. So what does that mean for the student? What does that mean for the teachers? What does that mean for government in terms of paying these teachers? What does that mean for the development of those students? What does that mean for also, people within the corporate space who are waiting to have, graduates to come and work for them? So I feel like education is one of the most important aspects that donors need to start looking at. Not only looking at in terms of giving it funding, but how can we do things differently? As it is, we are having a pandemic that has put everything to a stop. Like, people are not going to school, people are not going to work. What is it about our education system that we can actually change? How can we do things differently? What resources do we have at our disposal? How can we use them and leverage those resources to be able to be efficient and sustainable to a point that we are protected from any arising problem? Like, nobody was expecting COVID, right? So going forward, as organizations, as governments, as young people, how do we start doing things differently? And also, I think one other important aspect is the issue when we're looking at young people, it's income. if you look at maybe in Zimbabwe, a lot of young people are informal traders. They survive on selling on the streets, of which right now that's not an option. They also do like kukiakia or deals where basically, you know, they have to engage with each other to be able to transact, to be able to get something to put in their pockets or on the table. So I think that's where Thokoza probably would be an expert to tell us how best we can move forward. How can young people on the continent start doing businesses in a different way, so that, you know, we better equip ourselves for any other situation that is similar, that when it arises, how best can we remain sustainable? How best can we remain, you know, efficient and, you know, and functioning actually. So I feel like, you know, when it comes to youth, it's education and income. How best can we start doing things differently so that these people have income, these people have access to education? So for me, I feel like those are some of the most key areas that donors should be looking at, and looking at it with a different perspective, not just, you know, giving us money. Let's have money and ideas that, you know, help us, you know, go over the situation in the most efficient way possible.
That would be a dream, Africa. Thank you so much, Rukudzo, for sharing that. I think you also prodded your colleague Thokoza there to share some of the expertise in relation to entrepreneurship. So I want to come to you, Thokoza, to maybe also share your insights, taking on from what Rukudzo shared with us. And with that, I also want to add a comment or question that's come from Frank from the African Venture Philanthropy Association that says, and Frank says, I know that COVID-19 has had a devastating effect, but as they say, never waste a crisis. Are there business opportunities that the youth in your networks are identifying during this crisis? So Thokoza, maybe to tackle the question from Frank, but also to pick on from where Rukudzo left off.
I think education is important. I think what we probably need to focus on is what type of education would be helpful for young people on the continent to allow them to become economically active. For us, when we talk about entrepreneurship, it's the ability to respond to demand in the market. So it's great that you're passionate about, I don't know, going into space. But is there demand for you to take people into space? Are you able to run a sustainable business doing that? So that's like, for us, that's always the core question. What demand are you responding to? And is there a market for it? Is there a market for your product? So just examples of some of the entrepreneurs in our space who are responding and have identified opportunities. The biggest thing is the ability to be adaptable, right? So your product, whatever the product or service was, worked in the pre-COVID reality, but it's no longer applicable now. So how adaptable are you? Are you able to shift focus and identify new ways to provide solutions to the market? And some examples is we have entrepreneurs that are in the logistics space, and their businesses pre-COVID were focused on providing transportation for business to business logistics needs. So business people who are needing to move, who are maybe like on business travel, and when you arrive in Uganda, you need a personal driver to take you around. So they would have a network of cars to move business people around. They've taken that infrastructure now, and they're actually providing delivery services. So delivery of groceries, because people's movements are restricted. Delivery of products that are COVID related. So equipment and that sort of thing. We have entrepreneurs who are actually working in the medical space, and their products pre-COVID were developing different devices. Current reality, they're using their engineering expertise to actually build ventilators or to fix and provide maintenance services to hospitals that already have ventilators. So it's really about looking at what skill do I have and what is the need in the market now that I can use to respond to that need. We have entrepreneurs who are in the agriculture sector, whose clients are usually, your big hotels, your restaurants, which are currently closed. So they've shifted to providing those, those products or services to individual homes. And what they've included is that, home delivery aspect. So really it's about teaching young people to be adaptable. It's about teaching young people to identify the real problems that, that have an actual need, and then to believe in their own ability to come up with solutions. And to recognize their own ingenuity. I think as a people, as Africans, we are naturally resourceful. But I think it's something that we overlook. Just if we look at how our parents, how our grandparents have made, something out of nothing, and how we just make adjustments in our own homes with the little that we have. So we have that ability to come up with solutions that speak to a particular need. I think I don't want to go on too long. Stop.
Thank you so much, Thokoza. And I think, as they say, you are spot on that you adapt or you perish, and this really rings true. And for our continent as well, that you share that we are a continent that has seen so much crisis, and we've gone through so much, and the previous generations have also bequeathed us a legacy of overcoming adversity. And I guess this is also another generational challenge that has been thrown to us. And I have no doubt, also just hearing from the three of you, that we will also overcome this one. I want to switch to Ronald. And if you can, Ronald, briefly, please also address the question from Velapi. Velapi asks, and he says, how do we reach out to young people beyond cities, and particularly beyond elitist groups who may be privileged, and thus not necessarily representing the needs of many young people who are trapped in poverty, inequality, and unemployment in the context of COVID-19? Briefly, Ronald, please. And after that, I would also like maybe Rukudzo just to think about that in the context of tech as well. How do you get tech to reach all those communities that are on the margins and often overlooked? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for the question that has been raised. So reaching out to other young people who are not able to access some of these virtual platforms and even the internet is also one of the key issues that we are trying to address. And part of that, has been addressed through the use of one community radio stations that are youth-led, and also operating in some of these areas that are a little bit remote. And apart from that, there's also the use of the bulk SMSs that some of our young people, for example, in Namibia and also Zimbabwe, are also doing in trying to reach out to some of these marginalized young people. But most importantly, what young people have also tried to do is to engage the traditional structures that are already existing in some of these communities and reaching out to them to also ensure that some of these young people in these marginalized communities are not left behind. Because if you look at it, most of the critical information is coming through the radio platforms, the televisions, and mostly on the internet. So these are also part of the initiatives that young people are doing, to engage with these young people in the marginalized areas, and also some even trying to visit some of these communities, of course, observing the need to practice social distancing.
Thanks, Ronald. I think and that is very important to observe as we engaging during this time. And I'll come back to you, Ronald, later on. There's a question specifically on the work that SIOF is doing in the region. But now I think I want to go to Rukudzo. And Rukudzo, just to include that bit about tech, the role of tech in reaching marginalized communities, but also take this one with a question from Masejo from the Southern Africa Trust. And she asks, what of youth entrepreneurs who are in the informal sector? What support is available for them? You spoke a little bit about those ones that you say do Kia economy. How can they be better supported during this time?
So firstly, I think I'd like to address a question by Velapi. I feel like when we look at civic society has done a great job in trying to go to the grassroots and, providing solutions from a grassroots level. And then to touch on the question by Masejo, I personally feel like the youths in the informal sector have been largely left out. When we are to look at a lot of people who fund entrepreneurs, they look at entrepreneurs who basically are providing solutions for people who can afford, maybe people who have access to the internet. We hardly see somebody who's selling airtime by the corner of the street, or somebody who's a hawker, getting support for their business. We don't have, facilities or even VCs or funders who are particularly looking at those people. And you'd realize that those are the same people who make up the bulk of the informal economy, and most of them are young people. So I feel like we are lacking in that regard, most probably because we don't have set up systems that actually would maybe, I think most probably with investors and companies, their problem with investing in such a person is there's usually no collateral, and these people, they basically don't have accounting or any formal systems that basically support them in getting funding, and then with the investors getting their funding or getting their money back, their return on investment. So like I said before, this has been a wake-up call, and there's a need for us to start rethinking the way we do things. And in rethinking the way we do things, that means we need to look at all these other sectors that have been ignored, and that includes the informal traders on the streets. And these are the mostly affected people right now, as it is, right? So how do we actually come up with systems and facilities that support these young people in the streets who are selling, that support these people in the rural areas? I remember watching a video on LinkedIn of a young boy who's based in Kenya. He basically fixed a small machine to use to wash your hands. It's a lever, like where you just have to step on it, and then it brings out the soap and brings out the water. There is innovation within the continent. And you'd realize that for such a young boy, it'll be very, very, in as much as his innovation is good, but because of all these other systems that are required for him to be able to be eligible for funding, he won't be able to get funding. He won't be able to get, support. It'll just be a video that goes viral, and most of the times, that's it. That's why I feel like government in partnership with civic society. Why I am mostly for civic society, because I feel like civic society has played a crucial role in working from grassroots. They understand what is happening at grassroots level, and they can better work with government in providing information, even with private sector, because private sector usually starts from middle class going upwards. So how can we customize solutions that best help everybody? Because right now we are talking about solutions, but most of the solutions that we're going to discuss today are solutions that are maybe eligible to somebody in the urban area, somebody who has access to WhatsApp to have this information. The people who are actually discussing these solutions for are not even on this live video. So how best can we go back to those people and make sure that, we provide solutions, or we put up systems that actually empower them more? Because it's not like there are no solutions. The solutions are there. But how can we set up systems that actually, further empower those people and spearhead, sustainability and economic development from grassroots level?
Thank you so much, Rukudzo. This is an exciting conversation, but we are in our last 10 minutes or so, and there's still questions and comments that I would like to quickly run through so that you have an opportunity to respond from our audience. Comment from Zibusiso, he says the biggest impact has been the loss of income. Maybe if donors can attend to that, either financial aid for youth-run business or food and money support for vulnerable families. Then there's a comment from More Blessing, and she says that information might be there, but not easily understood. So I would say funders should also look at initiatives that seek to simplify and translate COVID info. Lungi says mental health is overlooked by many organizations. Kudos to you, Thokoza, and your team. And then I have 3 questions. So I want to start with the question from Laika. I hope I've pronounced your name correctly, and it's going to Thokoza. And Thokoza, maybe you take 2 questions in 2 minutes. I know you're very quick in your responses. Laika says, are there any startups that are engaged in the biotech or pharmaceutical industries that are working on vaccines? And what support is available for them? And then there's a question from Stigmata from the African Philanthropy Network. She says, what has been the role of successful youth entrepreneurs or businesses in their response to COVID-19? Would you please share your experience? Thokoza?
Yeah, I know of one example of a youth-run startup based in South Africa that's working in the biotech space. I just can't think of a name now. And what they've done is they've actually produced a testing kit. I wish I could remember the name. What I'll do is I'll find it and then I'll share it with you, and then you can maybe send it via email or on one of your social media platforms. And that's actually been really exciting, where young people are not just looking at, the low-hanging fruits, but are actually also looking at providing solutions that are in, I guess, what we would call very regulated industries. I think that also the health industry is highly regulated, so it makes it hard for a lot of young people to play an active role in that space as entrepreneurs if they don't join the industry as doctors and so on. And then the second question was, can you please repeat the second question?
Sorry, I forgot to unmute myself. Yeah. Fighting technology. So the second question is, what has been the role of successful youth entrepreneurs or businesses in their response?
Yeah, I can speak from my experience. A lot of the successful entrepreneurs in our space have actually been donating to their local communities. I know we speak of these sort of conversations only being available to people in urban areas, or people with within the formal sector. In our cohort is very mixed. So we are in over 20 countries on the continent, and quite a few of our entrepreneurs are in the informal sector. And one of the things we've done is our application process is not burdensome, because we recognize the realities that our entrepreneurs work within. So requirements such as, bank statements, some of our entrepreneurs, they do keep it, they have accounting records, but they're not on like an accounting, cloud platform. It's like in a book, but they have their record. So they would use that to support their application, as an example, just taking into context the realities that these young people are in. So quite a few of our entrepreneurs have been donating to their own communities, whether it's food, whether it's masks. For example, in the transportation sector, where people use motorcycles to get around, border drivers aren't going to buy a new mask for every trip. So entrepreneurs who are in the manufacturing sector, who are able to make make masks are donating those to people in the informal sector who are also entrepreneurs in their own right. And then what we've also been doing is actually hosting these webinars or conversations such as this, where people who are a little bit more established and have ideas on how people could problem solve, taking into account where they are providing that, that mentorship, where we're not just relying on older, more established professionals to be mentors or coaches. Young people amongst themselves are actually exchanging ideas and collaborating to leverage off each other's strengths. Yeah, those are just a few examples I can think of now.
Thank you so much, Thokoza, for sharing that. There's even more difficult questions, challenging questions coming through that I want to share with you as we wind down, and also making sure that I don't leave out any of the comments. I think we have a comment from Tanya that says decision makers must commit to ensuring young women's voices are part of the solutions. That's an excellent comment. I think, Ronald, you addressed the issue of putting young people generally at the center of decision making. But I think particularly young women is something that is of critical importance. And then there is a dual question. I think let me try to bunch into one. It's coming from issue of data. Again, and technologies and commerce. Tumiso says e-commerce is identified as a solution. However, how feasible is it for entrepreneurs to adapt to this technology when they are faced with poor infrastructure, lack of enabling policies that support e-commerce? And then Louise says digital access has emerged as a critical issue during COVID-19. Who is advocating for this basic right? Yeah, so let me just ask this quickly to you, Rukudzo, just to tackle this in a minute or so.
Okay, so I think I'll start with Louise, was talking about, advocating for the basic right of, access to digital access, basically. So I feel like currently as a continent, we need to be cognizant of our economic strength. And I feel like at this point, we're not at a point where we are able to provide, access to digital access to everyone. So what are the other possible solutions? So I think a bit to market my product, Mtabe, this is where we come in, where we are providing educational content to students without internet access. There are other players as well. I know there's Eneza Education which is based in Kenya. We are all trying to provide educational content using, USSD, because we realized that internet access is very, very low. So I feel like at this point, whilst our governments are trying to catch up, and whilst we're also advocating for, this digitizing wave to be a basic right, we should also explore other alternatives, leveraging on the already available resources. So you can look up Mtabe, you can look up Eneza. We're basically looking at USSD options of, accessing educational content, because cell phone penetration has been very high in Africa, particularly sub-Saharan Africa, due to mobile money, etc. And then the question from Dumiso about e-commerce. Honestly, at this point, it's not feasible much. Why? Because we basically have no access to infrastructure. But what I love about the entrepreneurs on the continent is they've looked at different ways of marketing their products. WhatsApp is very cheap. So somebody would post on their status, somebody would ask a friend to post for them, and businesses are running. Others actually use Instagram. I see with East African entrepreneurs, they use Instagram a lot. And you'd realize that a lot of people who make natural hair products, most of their businesses grew from marketing them on Instagram. They didn't have to put it on, and they didn't have to necessarily, go fancy with it. So like I said, what do we currently have, and how can we use the already available resources to solve the problems that we're currently facing? So in as much as e-commerce is good, but we need a start. And the start is starting by leveraging on the already available resources that we have on the continent. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Rukudzo. Unfortunately, we're running out of time, and I just want to ask our audience if you could bear with us so that we can have 5 minutes to wrap up and just hear the final reflections from our star panelists here. And I apologize if we didn't manage to get to some of your comments and questions. We will collect them, and we will continue this conversation on the other platforms that we have. But I just want to collect that we have had quite a lot of emphasis on issues of access to data, on e-commerce, on inclusion, and affordability, on issues of changing the models and structures of how we do everything, how we do education, how we do business, how we do innovation, and how we do policy making. We also heard about issues of human rights, and just the role of young people being there, young people being in the front line as health workers, young people being in the front line even as security forces, young people as innovators, as entrepreneurs, as educationists, and so on and so forth. This issue also, from the last comment that I'm reading from Stigmata as well, is national responses need to include youth needs, and do so by having them on decision-making and planning structures. So it's a big one on issues of decision-making. I want to end off just by hearing from each of you, starting from Ronald, then we'll go to Thokoza, and then we'll finish with Rukudzo. And my question is, the day after we defeat COVID-19, what is the community that you want to get back to? I'll give you a minute and a half. What do you want to get back to? What do you want to see happening in your community, in your Africa, after we defeat COVID-19? Ronald, you're on mute.
Unmute. Okay, thank you very much. After the defeat of COVID-19, definitely, it will be, also acknowledging the work that young people would have, done. And most importantly, I would love to see an Africa that prioritizes total investments in its young people, where young people are also afforded chances in decision-making. The future of Africa is young. Thank you.
Thank you, Ronald. Thokoza?
So we obviously champion the cause of young people pursuing with leadership potential, with pursuing entrepreneurship as a career choice. And entrepreneurship is usually perceived to be high risk. But what COVID has shown us is that everything is high risk. There's no such thing as job security. Your ability to identify opportunities to add value to the market is what's going to provide financial security. So how do we ensure that we educate young people to be value adders and not just, look at getting a qualification for the sake of it, but understanding the value that the qualification enables you to provide to the market. I'd love to live in an Africa where the trust factor around very young people and their capability to add value is recognized. Your ability to add value doesn't arrive when you're 30. So how do we redirect capital to this very young target, to this very young demographic? And lastly, mental health. I think we all need to pay more attention to ensuring that people are mentally strong, because there's a lot you can do when you are mentally sound and you have food in your tummy. So there's a question about donors. What can donors do? People need to eat. I can't think creatively if my most basic needs aren't met. So how do we ensure that people are able to cover their most basic needs so they can then take on all these other opportunities that are available? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Thokoza. Definitely, we cannot leave anyone behind. And the issue of adaptability is going to be critical as we move forward. Rukudzo, your final reflections on our discussions today. Your Africa, the day after we defeat COVID-19.
I think my fellow panelists have been very exhaustive, but just to add on, I think better policy making at government level, corporate level, and organizational level, to a point where we are providing solutions that basically work for everyone. It could be in the education space. How can we do things different? How can we be more inclusive of the informal traders on the street? And as Thokoza said, how can we be providing, the most basic needs to everybody? Because I feel like this whole situation, as I said before, has been a wake-up call, and we cannot necessarily copy paste the same solutions that we've been using before. It's high time we do things differently. And I saw a comment within the comment section that I feel like this is a time for Africa to do things differently, because it's so unfortunate that each and every time we have to cry foul, but we have access to human resources. I mean, Africa's youth is so bright. Let's leverage on Africa's youth. Let's listen to them. Let's give them the opportunity, and from there we can have solutions that work for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rukudzo. I think we will end on that upbeat mode, and definitely, as we started, that the young people of Africa are the biggest shining jewel in the crown of the continent. And I think your insights that you've shared today are testament of all of that. You have shared with us a rich, really deep, rich pool of information and insights and experiences that does continue to inspire hope that there are solutions amongst the young people of this continent, and that we will overcome this pandemic. But even before that, young people on the continent have been doing the most, as is said. And I just want to, on behalf of the Southern Africa Trust, also encourage you to continue with the work that you do in the communities that you serve, but also not to be limited by the physical borders, by the passports that we carry, but to continue to ensure that in the most marginalized communities, that we do not leave anyone behind, as we seek to create a new future and a new system for the development and betterment of our continent. Intergenerational dialogues are going to be very important, and we cannot do this without partnerships. And so I thank you for sharing those insights, and I really do hope that our audience also join me to thank you, and we will continue this conversation in the different platforms across social media. So thank you so much once again for everyone that contributed questions, that was listening in, for taking the time to join us this afternoon. I wish you a very good afternoon, evening, morning, wherever you are, and encourage all of you to remain safe, remain sane. As Thokoza says, mental health is important as we continue to do this. In solidarity, thank you so much, all of you. Goodbye.
Most welcome, and thank you.